Hello, everybody. Merry Christmas. As you're listening to this, it's actually Christmas morning. So I hope everybody got what they wanted. You're with your family, and you're very happy.
Yeah.
I think I can speak for both me and Ethan when we say Merry Christmas. Ethan?
Yes, Merry Christmas. Luke and I are both very thankful for everyone who listens and everyone who's been kind enough to reach out and provide their support over the past few months.
Absolutely. We've had a lot of good people coming on the podcast.
Yes.
A lot of good interviews. And we've had a lot of good viewers, too.
Right, yeah.
Our listeners are extremely important to us. We've had very good feedback, and we're just very thankful for people who's given us a chance to do this. Today, it is very special. It is Christmas morning.
Yes.
It is undeniably one of the most special days of the year. And I know as you're listening to this, you might be sitting beside a fireplace or in front of a tree, and there could be presents surrounding you. And all the kids watching, I hope you were good this year. I hope you were nice and not naughty. But we have a special guest on the podcast today.
We do.
And this person, everybody in the world knows who this is. He might be one of the most famous people of all time. He needs no introduction. As we are recording this the day before Christmas. He is just about to leave on his trip around the world. It is the Santa Claus. Mr. Claus, how are you?
I'm good, Jeffrey. Thank you for the introduction. It brings a tear to my eye to see how much of an impact I've had on you two, and it's part of the reason why I do what I do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
It
sir.
means a lot that you've come here and met with us today and allowed us to look within your word for this short time.
When I sent you that letter a few months ago in the Christmas little Santa box at the mall requesting an interview, I never thought that you would actually come here. So when I heard back from you, it was actually an elf on the shelf brought the letter one night, your letter, to me, telling when you would be here, and I was honestly floored.
And I was also very happy to hear that you accepted Luke's invitation to come on the Ridge podcast. And thank you for coming out.
Who told you about us, sir, Mr. Claus?
It was Mrs. Claus, actually. She came to me and she said, Mr. Claus, there's this podcast I think you need to hear. It has fantastic book reviews and interviews from all the important people of the region. And then I was listening to the podcast, and although I don't have much at stake for, in specifically Southwest Virginia, it was a very well done podcast. And then whenever I received a letter from you, I was more than happy to come on the show.
Well, thank you, sir. It's an honor to hear that.
Yes, thank you.
We know you're a busy man, and you have to be leaving very shortly to actually begin your journey around the entire world.
Yeah.
You actually came in early this morning. As we're recording this, it's about 5 a.m. Eastern Time. Me and Ethan had to get here very early at 3 a.m. We actually watched your sleigh come in and land in his backyard. That was a sight. Rudolph's nose, you can almost see him from...
Oh, yeah. He
100
looks like a
miles.
plane landing. It's really beautiful. His nose is wonderful.
We were very impressed by that. We really were. But you're about to leave on your trip, so we have to make this quick. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the Levant area where Israel is, near there, about 1900 years ago.
That's a long time.
A long time ago.
So does that mean you're around 1900 years old?
That's correct.
Wow. What's it like having that many years of experience on your belt?
I've seen a lot of children, I've seen a lot of their reactions, and every time, it never gets old. It fills me with joy to see how happy they are whenever they receive their gifts.
Wow, I would agree. I can speak as one of those children who received a present from you many years ago. It makes me happy.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure it has made Luke incredibly happy as well.
And let me restate. I don't actually get to see it happen,
Sure.
but I get reports from my elf on the shelf, and even that is enough for me to know my impact, and that's why I do it. Yeah.
Did you start the Elf on the Shelf program?
That actually was only about 75 years ago that I started that.
Really?
It Well, in the past 75 years, the amount of children in the world have grown exponentially. And it's become harder on my mailroom to sort through all the mail and all the list of what people want. So sometimes it's easier for me to send out elves and for them to collect the information and then send it back.
Sure. How do you find these elves that are willing to work for you?
Well, that's another story a long time ago. Whenever I was born, there were many elves around. They almost look like short humans with pointy ears. And they not being as physically strong as some of the other people, they had a hard time finding jobs.
So you took them in.
So I took them in. They were discriminated against. So once I had the opportunity, whenever I was about 50 years old, I took them all and using my magical sled that I'd gotten, and I took them all to the North Pole.
So is this when you started bringing presents to children around the world, or did that start earlier?
Well, funny enough, that wasn't my initial intention, actually. I initially took in the elves just to shelter them.
Okay.
But then I realized that people who just sit there and they don't work very much, they're often not very happy people. So I thought, especially elves are very work oriented. So I said, how could I make the lives of my elves better?
Right.
And I know that the one thing that the elves are renowned for is they love taking care of children. So one of my lead elves came to me and said, well, we can make presents for the children of the world.
Right.
And I said, sure, that'd be a fantastic idea. So after that, I went to northern Siberia where I received my magical reindeer.
Okay.
And Rudolph was actually more recent. Is there anything in specific you want to know about?
Yes. Where did you go to school at?
Yeah.
In Israel.
Well, back in my days, there wasn't school. What we know of school now, the stuff we learn, is mostly passed down through the parents.
Okay, I see. So you were taught by your parents.
That's true.
Tell us a little bit about
By
them.
community leaders.
All right.
Okay.
Tell us about them. Who were they? What did they do?
Well, the specific area that I grew up was Phoenicia, which was north of modern-day Israel. Modern-day Lebanon would be the right area. And I learned from a young age how to navigate the world and fish. And this is how I traveled to so many places, met so many elves, and figured out how to get to the North Pole. Was from this training.
Is the power you have magical?
It is magical. But the magic is derived from the elves. I and myself are not magical, but the elves that could accompany me are.
I've always heard the magic comes from the spirit of Christmas.
And the elves carry that spirit. So it's a spirit of the elves themselves, not necessarily Christmas.
Are you able to utilize that magic?
Yes.
Okay. But the elves are the source of it.
Yeah, correct.
I see.
Is Mrs. Claus as old as you?
Yes.
Did you know her before you took on your role as the Santa Claus?
Actually, I was about 60 years old, about 5 years into my Christmas present program, and I met her.
How did y'all meet?
We met, she was a Roman, and one day one of my slaves, for some reason, I'm still not sure why, when the magic of the slaves broke down and I was stranded in Italy. And then, or at that time was Rome. So this Roman woman came out to help me, and then from there we got married and she became Santa Claus.
Did you guys maintain a channel of communication throughout the years, or did she come with you? How did that work?
She's my, we were stranded for about a month. So the people of the world at that time had about a month-long delivery present time.
Oh, I see.
So
That must have been stressful.
yeah, it must have been stressful. So then Mrs. Claus, then once we got the sleigh running again, we had to actually send for an elf team to come back because they don't want the magic to run it.
Right.
So so she came back with me after we got married.
How has the process of delivering gifts changed from, say, 1900 years ago to now?
Well, it's been both easier and harder to do it over the time. When I first started, there weren't as nearly as many children as there are now to deliver presents to.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah. And the types of presents that they wanted weren't as complex.
Oh.
But the elves were working by hand, and we had to manually fly with the sleigh everywhere.
Right.
So it took a longer time.
That's a good point. Yes, sir.
Now, when did you first move to your North Pole base, your home now?
Well, actually, the first place that we moved was Iceland. And even today, most people from Iceland still believe in elves because of this.
Right.
And then after that, and we had to relocate to the North Pole.
The North Pole is, as we know, it's very, very cold.
Yes.
How was that first few years like? Was it a lot of hardship?
Well, the hardest part, the elves, again, their magic helped us stay warm, but the hardest part was moving to the North Pole because we had to stay in a very tight caravan to do it. But once we got set up, it wasn't as hard.
What does the structure of your compound look like up in the North Pole? Is it massive? I'm assuming it's very, very large.
It is. But when it first started, it was more of a collection of tents, a caravan spot. Yeah.
Now, what would you say? How large is your city in the North Pole?
Very, very large. It's about the size of Austin. If you take Austin, Texas, which as it is a very large, spread out city.
So you're talking about millions of elves.
It's that times 10 easily.
Is it hid by magic?
It is. It's hid by from radar systems, things like that.
I see.
Okay.
That's understandable. When you were building this grand city of yours in the North Pole, did you really foresee it ever becoming this large?
Well, I didn't know the extent of the elf magic at that time. At first, I thought I was getting pretty old, and I thought I'm gonna have to have someone else take over this.
Sure.
But then I realized I'm not aging, and that's because of the elves magic. And then over time, it wasn't really planned, but as the elves grew in number, we had to expand the city.
And how many elves do you have exactly, sir? If you don't mind telling me, Sam.
The census information for the elves is even hard for me to access without a reason, so I don't know off the top of my head.
If you had an estimate, what would you say for the North Pole city?
The last time I checked, it was a little over 50 million elves.
50 million elves. That is incredible.
Do they have their own language that they can
I've heard it's
communicate
Elfish.
with?
You are correct, Jeffrey. It's around here colloquially known as Elfish.
Okay.
All right, I see.
And about you talked about your city. It is pop culture that there is a South Pole branch. Is that true?
Well, we had a small encampment at the South Pole, but unfortunately, the UN signed the Antarctic Treaty, so we had to relocate back to the North Pole.
Oh, I see. Well, very diplomatic of you, Mr. Claus.
We don't want to run into any problems.
So
with
there
the
really
UN.
isn't any South Pole location
Anymore, at least.
anymore.
No, it was abandoned.
At one time, how big was the South Pole location?
It was just a small area. It was
How many elves did you
underdeveloped.
say?
A little less than 1 million.
Wow.
So still,
Still large,
still
substantial.
but not by
large.
comparison.
Still
But not by
substantial.
comparison.
Sure.
and what year did that? I'm assuming in the 50s and 60s that took place.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
So you must have been down the South Pole for a good bit before that actually happened.
Well, that was even then. That was still a recent addition. We only started around a little after World War II, so it was only a short time we were there.
Can you
because
tell us the reasons behind that move to the South Pole?
Yeah.
well, the reason that happened was because airplane technology was taken off, and then now I know that's not a problem. But we were worried that radar technology would eventually be able to spot our city, so we needed
A contingency
a
plan.
contingency plan. Yes.
Very smart.
Was there a strategic reason that you chose to pick colder areas of the globe and that are fairly remote? Wouldn't it maybe make more sense to pick a central area where you can reach more children?
Well, with our magic, reaching the children isn't a problem. But the reason that we choose the cold areas is simply because there is no one there.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And our magic only protects against radar and overhead flights. It doesn't protect against people stumbling upon it. And we wouldn't want
see.
that to happen.
Right, that makes sense. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So,
As we're moving on here, so you and Mrs. Claus meet. She was a Roman. How do you and Mrs. Claus balance your work and personal life?
Well, we both operate as equal partners, and we both do managerial work.
it's a partnership, really.
It is. It's not. It's nothing official because we don't operate. We operate in international waters, even though it's not water. It's an ice cap.
Right.
So we aren't governed by any set of rules.
Are you concerned by global warming, or does your magic powers protect the area that you're situated around?
Well, as it is now, we're discussing that just last week, that our city is on the North Pole, which is far away from the edges of the ice caps. So even if global warming does continue, we'll still have a few hundred years.
Okay.
But should that time run out, it may be necessary to come out in the open and establish a international zone at the South Pole and to get UN clearance to do so.
So, you're talking to us now.
That's
There
correct.
is obviously a level of secrecy involved with your position.
Mm-hmm.
How
Well, I understand your concern, but last week we were talking about gradually coming out in the open, and this was the first step in doing so. It's
see.
coming out on the Ridge podcast, a very informed.
so you're coming
Thank you,
out
sir. Yes.
on the Rich podcast?
Thank you.
That's correct. Well, obviously people knew of us, but we're taking the next step towards UN recognition.
Do you have a
Okay.
publicist that you're working with, or how does that work? Is it
That's our next step.
okay? I see. Well, good to know, sir.
Good
So
to know.
I have a question. There are many companies like Blue Origin and SpaceX that are working to further the human race into space and maybe onto other planets. When that happens, will Santa still serve them, or there'll be a Mars Santa or a Moon Santa?
Or will your magic extend beyond?
Yeah.
Well, when that point happens, we have difficulty flying between planets.
Right.
I mean, the elf magic means that we can fly the reindeer and the people on board, but due to pressure and space radiation issues, the presents themselves often get messed up.
Oh, I see.
So, if there was a sizable population center outside of Earth, we probably would have to set up a different branch there to manage that area.
That makes sense. Thank you. So, can you walk us through what that process is to curate this collection of presents and wrap them? Do you start in January after you finish, or do you kind of wait till maybe November?
It's a year long. It's a year long.
A year long,
process.
so you don't have any breaks.
Well, we do.
About vacation, what that looks like.
Well, of course we vacation, and actually, many people have the thought that the North Pole actually ramps up its production around Christmas, but actually it slows down and prepares for delivery.
Right. Okay.
So for about 95% of the elf population, this period is a holiday,
Wow.
and along the year we have many holidays for our elves. Our elves are not overworked. 8-hour work shift.
But we'll get to the vacation question later.
Yes.
Ethan had a good point. What time of year do you really start buckling down on making the presents? And then what time of the year do you start? Are you completed with the making process, and you go on to the wrapping and delivery part of the Christmas?
Well, over the years, we've had to learn hard lessons. I mean, at the North Pole, sometimes we've been underproductive, and then we've had to ramp up production near. And then on 1 or 2 years, in the earliest parts of me doing this, sending presents to the world, we were actually short of presents, and that was a very bad situation. We don't want
Of course.
we don't want to happen again. It has never happened again.
Of course.
So instead, we keep production steady. We try to slow down around November, and our normal deadline to have the presents completed is November the 15th.
Okay.
But there's been a few years in the past where we've had to extend that deadline. But we've never since had a shortage of presents.
Now, what happens when the children tell you what they want for Christmas in December? What do you do then? That's what most children do.
Yeah.
Well, remember back to whenever I say that 95% is what we do?
Okay.
Well, with our elf on the shelf, this is mostly in recent years I'm
Sure.
talking about. And with our elf on the shelf, we've been able to get intelligence on these kids and learn what they want prior to December. So we can produce these and just produce general things.
Right.
But calling back to when I said 95% is laid off, most of that remaining 5% work on emergency orders.
Okay.
Which are orders where our intelligence could not gather what the children wanted. But regardless, we always, in the past 500 years, have gotten every single one of these emergency orders fulfilled.
Wow, that's impressive. It's an impressive track record, and I'm sure you're very proud of your elves and what you've been able to accomplish.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're very hard workers. They couldn't be done without them.
Of course.
To move back to the previous question, where and when do you tend to vacation, and for how long?
Well, life for Santa is one of hard work. I don't get to vacation except there's a period of a week in June where the whole of the North Pole is on vacation.
Wow.
And for that time, I tour around. I've seen the world, and sometimes I go to places that I like. In particular, I like to go to the Caribbean.
Which island in the Caribbean do you like to frequent?
I like the Grenadines pretty good, but I like all of them. I go around to this island, this island.
I always had the assumption that Santa vacationed for a whole entire month on some Pacific island. You're soaking in the sun, resting. Is that not true?
Well, then that comes back to the typical stereotype of the manager not working at all. That's not true. Managers all around the world, especially at the North Pole, managing such a large volume of presents, I'm constantly busy, and my Mrs. Claus is constantly busy as well.
Right. That's understandable.
So I simply don't have the time for such a vacation.
Sure. How do you keep your body running? Like, do you eat certain foods, drink certain drinks?
Yeah, what does your diet look like?
Well, I do have a tendency for cookies, I will admit.
Of course.
So are you telling the children that are listening to this to not put out cookies or to put out cookies?
No, I like the children's cookies. And I like whenever families across the world put out different foods. In the United States, it's cookies, but in other places, it's gingerbread.
Wow.
In other places, it's different food altogether, like a watermelon.
What's your favorite?
Well, there's always the classic of cookies.
Sure.
But sometimes I like a refreshing watermelon. It just depends on the year.
I guess when you're in certain regions with certain climates, certain foods taste better.
That's correct. I mean, especially in Christmas in the Pacific is actually very warm.
Yeah.
So refreshing fruit actually is very welcome.
What type of fruit do you enjoy?
Well, I like watermelons, obviously. Any tropical melon, like honeydew, or watermelons, but also like apples and anything that they put out, I appreciate, even if I don't necessarily eat them.
Sure.
That's why I want people to understand. That's more about the gesture rather than the practicality of it.
Of course. Like, how do you balance stuffing stockings versus giving gifts? Because I know a lot of children may have stockings and some may not.
Yeah, and we've also heard about the whole coal thing. Naughty children get coal.
Well, Jeffrey, I'll get to your question later. Stockings are actually very easily to produce because very few children request stocking items.
Sure.
So for that, we just generally produce during the earlier months of the year enough stocking stuffers for the children of the world.
Is that candy?
That's usually things like candy, it's things like toothpaste, things like deodorant, just little things that are used.
Sure.
What happens when children get things such as iPods in their stockings?
Well, sometimes it's better, it's more cushioned for the iPads
sure.
to be in the
Then the
to be in stock because a lot of children rip into their presents. You know, and that's not good for a lot of electronics. So sometimes we like to put that stuff in stockings.
Sure.
Okay.
Makes sense.
And moving on to the
coal.
next question, what about the coal? Do you still deliver coal to the naughty children, or how does that work?
Well, coal used to be a thing of the past, but what many don't understand is that in the past, coal was valuable. It could be sold. And although coal isn't as much as a present that the nice children would get, it still is something that they can use. Nowadays, we do things like electronic parts.
Okay.
That doesn't give the children as much joy as, say, the presents do, but it's still valuable to them, so they still aren't missing out. And
Sure.
it still potentially even helps their family.
Sure. Right.
Okay. That's very interesting.
Very wise.
What is the salary? What is the salary for Santa Claus? Is there a salary?
Well, the way we do at the North Pole is that we produce our own food using the Elves magic, so there's no need for a salary. I have everything that I could need.
So you're very
Self-sufficient.
You're very
Correct.
self-sufficient.
Correct.
Okay.
To kind of delve into your personal life a little bit, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
In the regular world, relationships are very important. And I'm assuming that is true for you too. Does Christmas put a strain on your relationship with Mrs. Claus?
It doesn't. I mean, that's one of the things that she loves Christmas as much as I do. If anything, we're very joyful around Christmas time.
Really?
Correct.
How do you maintain such a healthy relationship in such a trying time?
I don't mean to get into relationship advice on
sure.
the Christmas podcast. We just know what we like, and we make sure to maintain close. And then we just talk all of our problems through.
Yeah, that's wonderful advice.
Very sound advice.
Yeah.
Very sound advice. How do you deliver all those presents in one night?
It's very impressive
Very
how you do
impressive.
it.
Very
And I'm sure
impressive.
time zones help out with this to some extent, but
It does, but even then, it
It's
still
still
is
a
a big
challenge,
rush.
right.
Absolutely. And that's all I was saying earlier, that the way we did it was slow, so we've had to order more magical sleighs for not just me, but sometimes even elves to operate, to get the presents to all the children in the world. Because one man can only do so much.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, do your elves' magic allow you to fit down the chimneys, or is that just purely acrobatic ability on your part?
Well, again, that was chimneys used to be built a lot larger than they are, but due to fire concerns, now they're typically small and closed off mostly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So mostly what I do now is I use this elf's magic to get through the doors.
Okay.
It's much easier.
I see.
Do Christmas miracles really happen?
But they do.
Oh.
And
Really?
sometimes, absolutely. What we do isn't necessarily a miracle, but sometimes, family gets together. When family gets together, magical things can happen. And whenever friends congregate and family congregate, magical things can happen.
I agree. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. That's a very important part of Christmas.
Do you have a solid relationship with other figures like the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny?
Well, they've stolen my idea, but I don't have a problem with them because they too bring
provide
joy
joy.
to children. They
Right.
provide joy, correct?
Right. Do you speak with them on a regular basis?
Not really.
Is there a council for y'all? Y'all
Yeah.
get together once a year?
No, what we do is a much larger scale than what they do, since we specifically choose and produce presents for specific types of children. Whereas other holiday figures, if they do presents at all, some of them don't.
Right, that's a fair point.
You usually do more general presents.
Sure.
So there's no need for coordination.
Yeah. Do you have any plans to retire anytime soon?
Not anytime soon. I enjoy what I do, and I tend to keep doing it for a long while to come.
How long? So you could go on forever.
Yeah, unless something drastic happens, which it won't. Then yeah.
Do you have to have passports to enter all the different countries, or does the government just allow you to enter in without any trouble? Or do the magic of the elves help with that?
Well, the magic of the elves keeps us off of radar. Or
Right.
it keeps us off of long-term radar. We kind of operate like a stealth bomber does. If we get too close to the radar, even the elves' magic won't completely dispel radar waves. So instead, we have to kind of weave our way through certain areas.
Okay.
So we don't necessarily get a passport.
Okay, I see.
Or do you drink lots of coffee to prepare for Christmas?
When I was of course first starting, there was no such thing as caffeinated products in our part of the world that was available. So I never got used to caffeine enough to drink it.
All right, understandable.
And what does Christmas mean to you as Santa Claus?
Well, of course it means presents and joy, but it also means family and friends congregating together. And that's what I think the most important part of Christmas is that friends and family can come together in a joyous time and celebrate.
You've lived for 1900 years. Was it hard to see all of your family die?
That's a rather morbid question, but yes it was. But everyone gets over everything. If something tragic happens, eventually you'll get over it.
And I think the power of Christmas can help out a lot with that, can it?
Yeah, power, joy, power. And that's the thing, that Christmas helps people get over hard times.
Yeah.
Congregating with friends and family, that helps people get over some of the hardships that are happening in their lives.
Well, before we ask our last two questions that we ask everybody that we interview, we would like to ask if you have any special message to the children of the world on Christmas morning.
I would say, love your family.
Yeah.
I see all too often, and most often, the cause of the children being in the naughty list is disrespect to parents. But that's because the familial relationship is very important. And so that's what I would tell children is that your parents are going to be your best supporters throughout your whole lives.
Okay.
So it's important to keep a close relationship with them.
Yes.
Yes,
That's
sir.
a wonderful message.
Well, as we're wrapping up, we don't want to keep you. I can already hear the reindeer jingling outside. What advice do you have for young people just making their way in the world?
I would say that money isn't everything.
It isn't.
And that the relationships that you keep with people and that the experiences and memories that you have are, at the end of the day, going to be worth more than the amount of money that you accrue.
And then our final question,
It's a bit of a doozy, and you probably know more than anybody what this is,
and that is, what is the meaning of life to you?
personally.
Personally, well, it's my philosophy that everyone else finds their own meaning in life. There's no universal meaning of life.
Right.
But for mine, it's providing joy.
Yeah.
And I do this through presents.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Mr.
All right, well,
Claus.
Mr. Claus, this has been an honor for both me and Ethan. We do have one final request, that you would let us know which list we are on
Yes.
before Christmas.
Naughty or nice?
Are either of you two 18 yet?
No, sir.
All right, let me call up my elf manager. Yeah, could you Yes, this is urgent. Could you look into Jeffrey Watson's and Ethan Edwards' folder? Yeah, I can wait a bit. Oh, okay. He wants to know first.
I guess I can go
You
first.
can go first.
Ethan, you were on the nice list, and by a pretty good margin.
Thank you, sir.
Ethan, if he can tell you what he wants for Christmas now, that would be great. Ethan, what do you want for Christmas?
I would like some new books and college tuition, please, sir.
All right.
He's pulling out his checkbook.
Thank you.
We'll see to it.
Thank you.
And Jeffrey, you're next. Unfortunately, you are on the naughty list this year.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. You've been on the nice list most of your life, but
This year
but this year,
it was a rough year.
yeah, it was a rough year.
My behavior was bad. I'm sorry, Mr.
Does
Clark.
he still get to tell you his Christmas list?
You can.
I just want to be on the nice list.
I'm afraid we can't do that for you, Jeffrey.
Do I get college tuition as well?
No. But you get a bundle of electronics.
Well, that will be good. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome, Jeffrey.
That's all we have for you. I know there's a little elf knocking on the door right now. Mr. Claus, it's been an honor to speak with you today.
Just in time. Thank you.
Thank you.
sir.